Hey everybody, it's Angela Molson352, and I'm going to do a layout here of my hubby, and I'm going to mat it on this dark crate paper, Boys Rule collection paper, and I wish I would have taken the middle of this dark piece of paper out to mat with and then use the rest of it to frame my layout, kind of like Nancy does. And I don't know why I didn't do that. Nancy, why didn't I do that? But so anyway, I went into my scraps and pulled out a bunch of these little bits that kind of went with it. I thought about that dark paper, that gray paper, but it was just too gray and white, and the rest of them are a little bit more cream based. So I'm just kind of going through my scraps, finding stuff that'll work, and just kind of building up some layers to go behind my photo. And the photo is going to be approximately in the middle of the page, is kind of my idea at this moment. And then on the lighter background paper, I want to use some rubber stamps to kind of personalize this to kind of reflect my husband's interests and stuff like that. So I'm just cutting off the manufacturer's strip there. And then I'm going to kind of mark roughly where that's going to go, and I'm going to use these stamps. Some of these are the deep red stamps that I got from a Cherry on Top. Others are just ones from the $1.50 bin or that I've got on sale at Michael's. And so I'm just going to make some little tiny marks underneath my photo cluster here, just so that, I realize that I want some of the stamping to get covered up by the photos and stuff, but I do want some of it to show as well. So I'm looking through my inks to decide what color to use. I thought about black, but I didn't want the whole layout to get too dark. So I thought I'd go with some browns and also look and see if I had some grays, something that wasn't quite so dark. And so the only gray I have is I have a silver in one of those little Brilliance pads, and then I have that Old Road by Prima that I got in one of my Scraptastic kits. First I'm going to try this Versamagic, but it's so light that I can barely see it, so I know it's not going to show up on that cream paper. So then I go with the silver, and it's pretty and everything, but it's still a little bit too light. Then I try the Old Road, and I'm liking that. You can see it, but it's not in your face. And then I try the brown, and that's a little bit too dark. So I decide to go with the Old Road. Even though it's a small stamp pad, it kind of makes it difficult to get good coverage with a tiny little ink pad like that, but you know, it's not bad. So I just clean the brown off of my saddle stamp. And my hubby used to run cattle, and he was a mule packer, and he, worked on a horse for many years, roping and stuff. So that kind of says something about a portion of his life. So I wanted to use that. And then some of the other deep red stamps that I've gotten were this one, which is it's of an old truck, and it actually has like beer on the back. It's like an old beer truck, and my hubby loves beer. He loves beer, and he loves old trucks and stuff, so this is a perfect stamp for him as well. Kind of says something about his likes and interests. And that one doesn't stamp great, but it stamps okay. I don't think I got good enough coverage on the grill and stuff on there, but you can definitely, in person, you can tell what it is. And so then I move on to, this vintage motorcycle, and hubby rides motorcycles, has a motorcycle, loves them, and I love riding on the back of one with him. And so I have this vintage motorcycle stamp. So I just do that on the top corner. And then I'm also going to use this deer head and Because hubby likes to hunt, and we don't do it a lot these days, but I'm kind of hoping that he does this year because I could really stand to can some venison. And so I put that up there. And then I still need a couple more, so I kind of look around through my stash for some more stuff. And since I have the saddle, I decide to go ahead and add this horse stamp because he's owned horses and all that kind of stuff, although we don't have any at the moment. And I put that on there, and I just kind of overlap the saddle a little bit just to kind of cluster those two together. So I'm liking that. And then I really need one other thing to kind of go on the other side. And so I pull out this wheat stamp because that's something new that we've been doing is the farming. So that says something about him as well. And I do that. I need to get a tractor stamp, you know, like a John Deere or something, or a vintage tractor would be cool. So anyhow, I do that. So I'm liking this, and so I've just kind of personalized the paper to really, you know, be him and say something about him in a subtle way that's going to be in the background that you're not really going to see, or even a lot of people when they look at it aren't really going to even notice it, you know, but I will, and you know, people that know him will. So I just go ahead and adhere all my layers together. And it's going to go about there. And then I do want to layer some other things in there. So I'm going to have to go through my stash. At this point, I have no idea. This was about all I had in my head, was to use some of the stamps and put a photo cluster on top. And that was as far as I had planned anything in my head. So then I have this bunch of Saw Crafter stuff on my desk. So I'm thinking, you know what? It's got a lot of farm related things that I've gotten from her. So I decided to just kind of look through and see what items I could get to work on this layout. And I love the windmill. I used one of the windmills on a layout I did about our wheat field. And so I had this other one left. And on that prior one, I tried to use one of those little water pumps, but it didn't work on there, so I get one on this layout instead. And then I have these cool stars, and she has them where it has the outline of the star and the solid star interior. So I've got some stuff to work with. I also pulled out a few leaves. I don't think they make it on this layout, but I think the rest of it does. I love those leaves. I'm going to do a fall layout with those. So I kind of set them aside because I'm not exactly sure how many I'm going to need. And so I might wind up using the whole package of them. So I decide to just ink these MDF elements with the same Old Road gray ink. And it's just easy. It's not very messy like paint is. And then I know it's going to match in with the stamps I've already got in the background. So I just go ahead and ink these up. And on that water pump, I hadn't even noticed that there's a little tiny drip of water coming out of the spigot. So it's really cute, very intricate. And then I have to kind of place it around and figure out what I'm going to do because I want to ink the horse to be going the right direction that I want. So I decide I want the horse over there on the left pointing back into the photo since I already have the horse stamp in the background on the other side. So I go ahead and ink it so the horse will be facing that direction. Now I'm going to ink up some of the stars. And I just love these MDF elements because you can do so much with them. You know, here I'm just inking it, you know, very simple, but you can emboss it, you can paint it, spray it, put beads on it, flocking on it, all kinds of stuff. So now I pulled out a couple Saw Crafters stencils, and I have this one which is kind of like a chicken wire stencil, which fits in with all the farming type stuff he's done. And so even that kind of says a little bit something about him. So I go ahead and I just do those two corners. And then I want to bring a little bit of the kind of teal color that I have in the mat. I don't want this to get too monochromatic with just the gray. So I look through my stencils too and find I have this star stencil of Saws, and I also have a chevron and a brick one I pull out just to kind of test and see what I want to do. So first I've got to find a color that's going to kind of match that mat a little bit, because I don't want it to stand out a lot, but I just want to give a touch of color. And that teal was just way too dark, too much green in it. So this lightest one that I found is a little bit more blue, but I want to go ahead with that. And I decided to just go with the chevron pattern, this chevron, because it matches the mat that's directly behind the photo, has some chevrons in it. So I just lightly put a few of those on there. Like I said, I don't want them to show up a lot, but I just want to bring a little tiny bit of that color into the rest of the layout. And so now I'm trying to decide whether I want these MDF elements to overlap. So I play around with them, and when I tried overlapping them, it just got too tall, and especially the stars with their pointy edges, I thought that might poke into the page protector a bit too much, because I hang these on my wall in my scrap room a lot of times for a while, or I put them on a stand and display them, and then after that I just put them into the page protectors in my scrapbook. So I know eventually this is going to go into a page protector, and I just didn't want the pokey bits of the star, you know, to get out of hand there. So what I decide to do is to let some of them touch, but not overlap. So you can kind of see me just moving stuff around, and I'm going to loosely make it so that the elements go from the bottom left to the upper right. That's the direction that they're going to flow. And so I'm going to get out, I have some star paper that's also in the Boys Rule Crate Paper collection. And I'm just going to back the two outlined stars with that. And that brings in a little bit more of that teal color and a little bit more repetition of the stars. And it also makes it less busy, because I didn't want all those layers to kind of show up through the star, because at this point I think I'm going to overlap the corners, or overlap my mats and stuff with the star, but I don't think it actually winds up that way. But I didn't want it, whatever was behind the star, I didn't want it to get too distracting. So I'm just kind of roughly cut around the star and then just glue it on. It's pretty easy to do. I keep hearing this strange noise in the other room, and I have no idea what that is. It must be some printer or something cycling, or I don't know. Okay, so anyhow, I get my two stars backed with this teal paper. And then I go ahead and I also use the quick dry glue and just put a light coating of it all behind this windmill, because I know it's got to span over a couple layers of this mat and stuff. And I just put that so it's sticking up kind of over the motorcycle, but you can still see the motorcycle to each side. And the ink on that is still a little wet or tacky, and so I decide to just kind of blast it with the heat gun there just to dry it up. so I can handle it a little easier because I'm just being impatient and not waiting for it to dry completely. And then I want to put the water pump over to that side, and I like it going kind of over that white mat or that white edge on the photo. So I just put that, and you can see a little glue right there, a little white, but that actually dries matte finish, clear matte, so you won't see it later. And so here I'm trying to figure out how to place these other elements. And I'm still toying with the idea of putting the elements on top of each other. And then here's where I decide to just kind of put them underneath and touching like that, but not overlapping. So once I do that, I just have my glue gun and kind of put that star so that the windmill is kind of sitting on the star. And then I'm going to put the other big star down at the bottom. And that makes a shelf for the back two hooves of the horse to be on. So it kind of gives him something to stand on so he's not floating. And again, I'm just using a little bit of hot glue. And that way you can still see on the truck. I want to make sure that at least the grill of the truck is showing, because I think that's kind of a cool feature. And then I'm trying to let some of the other bits of the stamping show through. So now I've got those items on, and I know I need more layering. So I have this little thing of just extra die cuts. I mean, leftovers and ends of packets and things. Sometimes when I get cool junk mail, I will use my punches on it and just punch out shapes out of junk mail and stuff. So I have a lot of these little bits and pieces, and I just thought I'd go through those first. See, that one, that tab piece was like from a box of perfume and Christmas cards and things like that, where it's a nice heavy cardstock or it has a neat finish to it or something like that. I just use my punches and punch it and throw it in this bin. So I go ahead and I pull out some leaves that I had punched previous. I think I used them on that coyote layout that I did, and I had them left over, and so they went in that bin. So now I'm going to go ahead and use them up. And because he's sitting outside on the hill overlooking the field, I wanted to use kind of a nature element. And I like the color of it. It's, you know, matches in with the photo, and it's kind of still a masculine color, and it goes well with the colors that I already have. It's kind of a brown, but almost to the kind of a maroon color. And so I just kind of figure out a way I want to arrange those, but still I'm trying to keep it so you can still see the grill of that truck in there. And then I pull out this other tray I have of just little cut apart sheets and all those little tidbit type things. And I'm just looking through for things that I think have the right color or sentiment. And I probably should have sped this up a little more because I've got a lot of them to look through. But probably everybody has a stash like this. You know, I don't know, out of those two trays, out of that die cut tray and then this little cut apart tray, I could probably make 100 layouts. And yet I barely made a dent. And I used scraps behind my photo, and yet I hardly made a dent in my scrap bin either. So I'm trying really hard to use these up. And a lot of these I got with my Scraptastic This Life Noted kit. And you know, all those kits and stuff, and I don't get those anymore. So I'm using these up a little better, getting caught up. So now I'm going through my little stickers and also pulling out ones I think might work. And sometimes I do this. A lot of times I take a collection and scrap with the collection, but I think most of the time this is the way I scrap. I take paper from this collection, scraps from over here, cut aparts from something else, stamps or die cuts from another collection, and I'm just kind of all over the place. And that just seems to be something that works for me. A lot of my layouts they're not very matching, and they don't come from one single collection. You know, sometimes I'll do that, but other times like this, I'm just, yeah, all over the place. And I think that helps me use up scraps and stuff and not get stuck with just using a collection. So now I'm cutting out some of those that I like the colors of. And I like that little teal one that I just cut out because it has little stars on it and it's the right color. And then I like these two word sheets because they have the teal words on them. And I cut out the summertime, but the brown just wasn't quite right. So I wind up taking that off, but I like this one with the little stars because it's a little bit of repetition on those stars, and it says only you on there. So I decide to go ahead and glue that down. And then I decide to go ahead and start placing my leaves down. And I'm just again using the quick dry and just putting little dots of it here and there on the leaves to hold that down. And I like how lacy it is and how it flows. And then I have these little brown leaves. I've had those for a long time, so I'm glad to get those on a layout. I think that was like in a card kit. That was one of the first card kits, and it had a bunch of little die cut leaf sprigs and stuff in it. And now I'm going to place this last one. And I'm thinking about at this point that I want to kind of put my title in there somewhere, but I'm not sure at this point. So I go ahead and start sticking on the leaves on the other side. And leaves and flowers are such a great element to kind of connect things because you can kind of overlap them and they flow more. And so I really loved using these on here because it just softens the layout so much. So I get those on there, and then I'm like, okay, I need to use a few more of these elements. So I'm just kind of trying out different places because I'm thinking either I want to put a cluster down there or I want to put the title down there. So I'm go through my stickers, and I like that, but I then got to thinking that I kind of wanted my title to be there. So I look through this sticker sheet from my mind's eye, and it says, I love everything about you, but I cut off the you and I stuck it back on the sheet. And I'm going to use some thickers to spell out the word you. So I pull out my thicker bin and I look for some browns and teals. I just have them in an old enamelware container. And then I kind of look to see which one I want to use. And the browns just weren't quite right, so I go ahead with this teal, and I only want the word you out of it. And at first I take a capital Y and a small you. But then I thought, you know what, it's kind of the end of a sentence, so I go ahead and do all lowercase. And then that's going to finish up my title. So it's going to be, you know, kind of a small title, but I like how the U kind of nestles into those, into the foliage there. So it says, I love everything about you. And then that other teal piece I had already put there, that dark teal, says only you. So it kind of says, I love everything about you, only you. And I'm using my hot glue to stick these down because these thickers aren't super sticky to begin with. And then with all those different layers underneath, I knew it wasn't going to stay. And then because I want that to overlap onto the water pump, I go ahead and put some pop dots under the other side just to pop that up. And so that kind of finishes off my title. And then I can still see the grill of that truck kind of showing up through. And then I look through because I'm thinking about adding like a date sticker or something like that. But I decide to just, I think I'm just going to handwrite the date on the layout. So I look through and I'm thinking it's getting close to done. And then I see that I didn't glue in my other piece of foliage that I had sitting there. So I go ahead and do that. And then I also had one more of the stars that I had inked, and it had gotten pushed over to the side. And so I decide to put that one right in there. So I just get my hot glue. And so that pretty much completes my layout. And I love the colors. I love how it turned out. It's very masculine, and yet it says a lot about him. You know, I really tried to choose all the elements that went on there that kind of talk about him. And so I really love, you know, all that detail. So there is the deer stamp, there's the chicken wire stencil and the chevron stencil, the MDF star and the windmill. And you can still see the motorcycle back there. There's the other star. Then you've got the horse and saddle. And then I've got the title and the little water pump. And the wheat, and then the truck and the horse and the other star and stencil patterns. So I really like how it came out. I mean, I didn't have all that much direction when I started, but you know, I went through my scrap bins and, you know, got, you know, some of that used up. And so anyhow, that is my finished layout. So if you have any questions or anything, just leave me a comment below, and thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.